Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 43. This venerable one is a sacrificial offering? Moran didn't even get the chance to respond before an ear-piercing shrill voice ranged behind him, "Make way, make way. Let me through." It was the Meatbun. Carrying the heavy pile of rocks, the Meatbun trudged to the same apothecary as before where it called, "I can't take it anymore. Hurry and save me, doctor." A white-haired merman swam out, but his tail was distinct from those of the others, the entire length glittering resplendent like flowing gold. His hair was held back with simple clips and draped over his shoulder, and although his face was wrinkled, it was well proportioned with straight nose and pleasantly curved lips. His golden eyes were tranquil as a misty drizzle. It was easy to imagine how handsome he must have been in his prime. Moran quivered. This was different from before. Where did that turquoise-colored dragon go? The elderly merman glanced at them from afar but said nothing. Instead, he made his way to the doorstep and bent over to take the rocks off the Meatbun's back one by one. With the removal of the last rock, the illusion shattered and the Meatbun exploded, its blood diffusing into the water like a haze of fog. At that, all the monster and creatures in the market stiffened for a second before drooping bonelessly as their body festered and saturated the lake water with a miasma of blood. The water was dyed red, the color deepening rapidly as more and more blood seeped out. It became difficult to see things in the distance and the immediate area was smothered. Soon enough, scarlet filled their vision and they couldn't even see their hands in front of them. Chu Wanning called out, "Moran." Moran Nu answered back, "I'm here, Shizun, don't worry." Chu Wanning was a man of few words, or rather, he was not good with words. He was silent for a moment before saying only, "Be careful." Because of the muddled bloody water, Moran couldn't see his face, but he could easily sense the concern in his Shizun's voice. Since Chu Wanning rarely show affections in any form, this made Moran's chest felt warm. He gripped the other's hand tighter and replied, "Okay." Standing close and back to back, they could feel the other's heartbeat and breathing even though they couldn't see. The situation is perilous, so Chu Wanning summoned Tianwen, and Moran, having recovered his spiritual strength, followed suit with Jiangui. Chu Wanning turned to look towards the apothecary where the elderly merman was cleaning up the rock pile just now and saw that a couple dozen white-colored light spots of various sizes had appeared on the ground. Hand in hand, the two of them walked over, and sure enough, the light spots were the Meatbun's rock. The elderly merman had arranged the several dozen rocks into 3 neat rows, every piece flowing with a gentle radiance. Slowly, a figure appeared before the rocks. It seemed it still was the same white-haired merman from earlier. Moran asked, "Who are you?" He didn't answer, only glancing at Chu Wanning and then at Moran before wordlessly lifting his hand and pointing at the rocks on the ground. Moran said, "You want us to pick up the rocks?" The white-haired merman nodded, then extended a single finger. "Do you meant to pick only one?" The white-haired merman nodded, shook his head, pointed at Moran and then pointed at Chu Wanning. Moran figured it out, "We should each pick one." This time the white-haired merman nodded vigorously before standing still and stared at the two of them. Moran turned to Chu Wanning and asked, "Shizun, should we do as he say?" Chu Wanning answered, "Might as well, since we don't have better ideas, anyways." So they each pick a rock, but as soon as the tips of their fingers touched the rocks, a multitude of distorted colors flashed before their eyes and the world spun around. When things settled down and the endless red had disappeared, they found that they had been teleported to the holy weapon arsenal. Shizun! Shizun! Aran! Xuemeng and Shimei were here, too. Shocked and overjoyed to see Chu Wanning, they rushed over to them. Chu Wanning hadn't expected the glowing rocks to be enchanted with teleportation spell. He still felt a little nauseous from the rapid spinning. He put a hand to his forehead, the other hand still tightly clutching Moran's. With Chu Wanning's status, he rarely had the opportunity to hold hands with Moran. Most of the times, he can only stand on the side and watch the closeness between his disciples, and so, He cautiously cherished this rare warmth in his palm. Shimei. The moment he saw Shimei, Mo Ran very casually let go of Chu Wanning's hand. Chu Wanning's fingertips twitched slightly, and for a moment, it seemed as if he wanted to grab onto him, but what excuse did he have to do that? He no longer had the courage to like someone. He didn't want to lose the pathetic bit of pride he had left, too. Watching Mo Ran smiled easily at Shimei, hugging him casually and stroking his hair so gently, Chu Wanning's hand dropped back down with some awkwardness. Luckily, his face was normally expressionless, so his emotions didn't show through. Maybe because he was getting older and such a stiff person that after the spin in the teleportation array, his chest felt tight. However, he could still a bit of warmth left at his fingertips, so he tried to hold on to the bit of warmth as he slowly stood up and straightened his expression. Shizun, are you alright? Your face is so pale. Chu Wanning nodded at Xuemeng and said, I'm fine. Then he asked, were you two also teleported here by that mare man? Before Xuemeng had a chance to respond, there came a burst of bubbling sound. Chu Wanning turned to see half a bloody face followed by a disfigured person emerging from the boiling hot smelting pool with a splash. This person was definitely not mortal, for no mortal could survive being submerged in the fiery molten metal as this person, though raw and burnt all over, clearly still drew breath. Chains shackled his forelimbs and held him inside the smelting pool to suffer. He slowly opened his eyes and bowed towards them, gaze begging them to approach the smelting pool. Although he couldn't speak, he did have other means of expression. They watched as he waved his arms, bloody flesh barely clinging to the bone, and a small wave surged forth from the molten metal in the pool to form several rows of ancient script in the air. Xuemeng was startled. What kind of writing is this? I can't read a single character. Chu Wanning replied, it's ancient Kangja script, something I've yet to teach you. Mo Ran then asked, what does it say? Chu Wanning walked up and carefully studied the writing. He is asking for help. According to legend, ancient Kangja script was the writing of the heavenly realm. It was practically a lost art in the human world, as very few people knew it anymore. Even an accomplished Zongshi like Chu Wanning couldn't read all of it, but he could at least get the gist of it. Chu Wanning carefully studied and interpreted the writing. He said that he is the spirit of this willow tree named Zazanlu Heart Pluck Willow. When he was a sapling, Goshen Shanggong brought him here from the seventh heaven of the realms of the gods. Afterwards, Goshen abandoned this world for unknown reasons. Zazanlu hadn't seen him since and doesn't know if he still lives. But even without him here, Zazanlu had always followed his instructions these hundreds of millennia, protecting Jinjinj Lake and guarding the holy weapon arsenal. Nourished by the spiritual energy here, it gradually cultivated into human form, and the days passed without incident until one day when Chu Wanning suddenly stopped reading. Mo Ran asked, what's the matter? I don't recognize these three characters. Seems to be a name. Chu Wanning said, raising a hand to point at the complex, twisting characters. This person came to Jinjinj Lake. He was powerful and cruel, slaughtered everything in the lake and used Zhenlong chess formation to control them, including Zazanlu. Mo Ran exclaimed, that person is probably the fake Goshen. Hearing his words, Zazanlu's eyes blinked and he nodded twice in agreement. Huh, I guessed it right. Mo Ran grinned, a little embarrassed, scratched his head, and said, haha, I'm pretty smart at. Chu Wanning briefly glanced at him and continued, in the years since then, Zazanlu has been in unconscious state. Fortunately, the other two willow branches that it had once been connected with, Tianwen and Jiangui, both awakened. Borrowing their strength, Zazanlu was temporarily able to regain consciousness. If not for that, it probably would have already lost control and hurt everyone here. Hearing this, the three youths looked apprehensively at the being in the smelting pool. Mo Ran started, Lu Qianbei Senior Willow. Xuemeng, Lu Qianbei. Well, how else should I call him, Zai Qianbei Senior Pluck. Mo Ran glared at Xuemeng then continued, You probably won't like what I'm going to say, but there seem to be some holes in your story. Zexin Lu could not speak, but it could understand spoken words. He turned to face Mo Ran. You said you were under the fake Goshen's control but then regained your consciousness under the influence of Tianwen and Jianghui's awakening. But it was the fake Goshen who gave me Jianghui. How could he have not known the consequences of doing that? Zexin Lu shook his head and the characters in front of Chu Wanning changed. I am of the realms of the gods. He knows little about me and is unaware that the holy weapons could affect my consciousness. In his pursuit of the 3 forbidden techniques, he needs to draw upon my power, but my lifespan is coming to its end. He has been frantically looking for a way to extend my life. But I really do not wish to continue living. Death is much preferable to helping this villain. It's just that I am under his control and cannot act of my own will. Chu Wanning paused at this and contemplated. That must be why he brought Mo Ran here. Mo Ran is a wood elemental spiritual essence. That fake Goshen must be planning to combine his spiritual power with that of Jianghui and offer that as a sacrifice to you. Zexin Lu nodded. Mo Ran still has his doubts, but that fake Goshen said so himself. There are 2 wood elemental spiritual essences. Shizun is also one. Why did he locked up only me? Zexin Lu wrote, sacrificial offerings have always been better the younger they are, and even more care must be taken when making an offering to a tree spirit. Moreover, the offering must be sated in appetite and desire, satisfied in every need, and their life must be taken while they are immersed in a euphoric illusion. If the offering have even a slightest regret, the resentful energy would accelerate my withering instead. At this, Mo Ran recalled the fox spirit monster in the cell that took on Chu Wanning's appearance. So that was to sate his desires, like fattening up a pig before slaughter. That would also explain why he sought Chu Wanning instead of Shimei. He cherished Shimei far too much to want to defile him. When it comes to his desires, he indeed lust after Chu Wanning much more than he did Shimei. Seeing the strange expression on Mo Ran's face, Chu Wanning thought he was still uneasy and tried to comfort him by asking, what are you thinking about? And nothing. Mo Ran's face started turning red. Comprehension dawned on Chu Wanning. He turned away in a fit of rage. This guy is definitely daydreaming about his so-called desires. Chu Wanning flung his sleeves in indignant anger and muttered, shameless. Mo Ran. Good thing Chu Wanning didn't know how the fake Goshen intended to satisfy desires in that illusion, or he would probably skin him alive. He was in the middle of this musing when the holy weapon arsenal suddenly started shaking. Xuemen yelled, what's happening? End chapter. Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 44. This venerable one doesn't want to owe you. Zexin Lu did not get the chance to respond before his expression twisted and he clutched his head in pain, mouth open on a soundless scream. But even though he couldn't make any sounds, the agonized screams were audible in that horrifying expression and those bulging eyes. Save me! Save me! His lips twisted into an inconceivable shape, bloody veins spreading quickly across his eyeballs. If not for those chains keeping him in place, he likely would have already vaulted up and violently ended his own life. I beg of you, hurry and destroy me. It seemed that Zexin Liu's grasp on his consciousness was nearing its limit. He struggled in agony but to no avail as black fog surged out from the smelting pool, crashing into and attacking the body trapped inside. The chains rattled sharply as sparks flew. Seeing this rapid turn of events, Chu Wanning moved quickly, long sleeves sweeping as he shielded the disciples behind himself. How can I save you? Zexin Lu moved slowly, but he could still control the molten metal in the pool. More rows of ancient Kangja script formed in the air. I am about to lose my consciousness and attack you. It is not my intention to hurt you and there is no time to explain. The only thing I can do for you now is to tell you of the techniques at my disposal, pray take care. The molten metal reformed again. I am well versed in 3 techniques. First is Sweetest Dream, a nightmare technique that puts those afflicted to sleep and grants them whatever they desire in the dream. Even those with strong spiritual powers who could perceive that it's only an illusion would still willingly stay in the dreamscape, never to wake. Second, temptation of the heart, using what the person desired mostly as enticement, it induces the afflicted to kill another. Third, heart pluck. But Zexin Lu seemed to have exhausted his spiritual energies and could no longer control the molten metal to form more words and didn't able to explain heart pluck. A mist of blood exploded from the struggling Zexin Lu. He dragged his fingers through the spilled blood, his bulging eyes fixed on Chu Wanning, struggling for self-control. Tears welled up in his eyes. Chu Wanning, you want me to go over? Zexin Lu nodded slowly. Shizun. Xuemeng hurriedly grabbed him as Chu Wanning approached Zexin Lu. Don't go, it might be a trap. However, Chu Wanning shook his head and approached the smelting pool by himself, extending a hand. Zexin Lu seemed quite touched. He struggled to wave his flesh-dangling arms as if trying to bow toward Chu Wanning. Then, enduring the searing agony, he grabbed Chu Wanning's hand and wrote shakily in his palm. Draw your lots, break the nightmare. Do not lose sight of your heart. Once the nightmare is broken, the trial ends. He hadn't finished writing the last words when he suddenly crumbled like a pile of mud and fell back into the smelting pool, disappearing from view. An enormous wave of scarlet rose from the pool with a loud crash. The molten metal surging into the sky as 9 pillars of flames each formed in the shape of a dragon roared up from the ground. Chu Wanning was forced to retreat, the fire reflected in his eyes. Suddenly, 4 tokens zoomed out from the fiery pillars of molten metal, hanging in mid-air. Shi Mei, remembering Zexin Liu's words from earlier, asked, are these the tokens for drawing lots that Zexin Liu mentioned? He stepped closer but Chu Wanning stopped him. Don't touch it. All of you get behind me. Shi Mei turned to him, Shizun. I'm here, it will be all right, Chu Wanning said. Don't take any chances, let me go first. He spoke calmly but Mo Ran's heart quivered. For some reasons, the Chu Wanning before his eyes overlapped with that heartless person from his previous lifetime, the one who coldly watched his own disciple die. If he could say something like this, then why did he stand by and did nothing in the past as his disciple died? Mo Ran suddenly felt like he had never understood Chu Wanning. He also muttered despite himself, Shizun. Chu Wanning paid them no mind as he lifted a hand and picked one of the tokens suspended in the air. The token was made of jade, light yellow in color. He looked it over front and back with a puzzled expression. What's wrong? Xuemeng asked. There's nothing on it, Chu Wanning replied. How could that be? Xuemeng asked again. Let me try. Then he picked one of the tokens which prompted the other 2 to pick each as well. Xuemeng and Shi Mei's token were the same as Chu Wanning. There was nothing on them. Mo Ran's however did have some character written on it but he could not make sense of it as he tried to read it. Blass. The other 3 looked towards him as Xuemeng frowned. What's a blass? Xuemeng shuffled over to take a look and immediately hollered angrily, Pa! You just read half of what you could actually make out. It's blood hourglass. Chu Wanning said as he recognized the Kangja script written on the token. Mo Ran absent-mindedly asked, what does blood hourglass mean? As if in answer, a low rumbling sound came from the arsenal's towering roof and a massive copper hourglass mottled with rust descended. Unlike other hourglass, this one had a cross mounted on it, its purpose not yet known. Chu Wanning glanced at the hourglass then looked at the token in Mo Ran's and realization dawned on him. He shouted in a stern voice, Mo Ran, throw that token away. The order left no room for argument so even without knowing the reason, Mo Ran moved to obey, almost subconsciously. However, he found that the jade token was firmly stuck in his hands and he couldn't fling it off no matter how hard he tried. Chu Wanning cursed under his breath and rushed towards to trade his token for Mo Ran's. At that moment, Dozens of thorny vines suddenly burst forth from the rusty hourglass and headed straight for Mo Ran. Chu Wanning, move! Shizun, the disciples screamed. Blood splattered everywhere as the thorns pierced into Chu Wanning's body like numerous arrows as he managed to shove Mo Ran aside at the last moment. Mo Ran stumbled backwards and fell to the ground as the sound of tearing flesh reached his ears. Xuemeng and Shimei's twisted screams were loud and shrill. No way! How could this be? This is Chu Wanning. The one who beat him and scolded him and never looked at him kindly. The one who callously watched as his own disciple died right in front of him. The one who coldly described him as inferior character, questionable abilities. Mo Ran looked up. Amidst the chaos, he saw the blood soaking through that person's robes. Sharp, densely packed vines pierced from his back all the way through the front at the same exact place where he had been injured by the master of ceremonies deity before. The old wound had not yet healed and was not ripped open again into a bloody mess. The one who protected him with his own body in the coffin, who didn't make a sound as the claws stabbed through him. The one who were hiding under the bridge and secretly put up a barrier to shield everyone from the rain and wind. The one who after Shimei's death in the previous lifetime, went to the kitchen and clumsily made wontons so that he might eat something. The one who has such a bad temper and cannot articulate himself in words, whose hates bitter medicine and coughs from spicy food, the one he knows the best. The one he never cared about, whom he hated but can't help pitying. Chu Wanning. Wanning. Shizun. Mo Ran screamed as he scrambled towards him. Shizun. Your token. Chu Wanning's hand shook as he lifted it. His face paled but his expression was as steady as always. Trade with me. The hand that extended toward Mo Ran held his own blank token. He raised his arms with difficulty, trembling minutely with pain. However, his eyes were bright and resolute beneath the layer of wetness. Hurry, give it to me. Mo Ran hadn't gotten up, he half crawled, dragging himself toward Chu Wanning as he helplessly stared at his horrifying wounds. No. Shizun. Xuemeng and Shimei moved to come over as well. Chu Wanning's expression was one of expression as he erected a barrier to keep them out and then called harshly, Tianwen. Tian appeared as called, slicing clean through the dozens of vines piercing through Chu Wanning. But those vines were no ordinary entities. Chu Wanning could feel them devouring his spiritual energy from where they were buried into his flesh. Having no choice, he could only grit his teeth as he grabbed the broken ends of those vines and ripped them out. A rush of blood spilled out instantly. Chu Wanning tossed the vines aside and let out a breath. He quickly tapped his meridians to temporarily stop the blood loss. Then he leveled a glare at Mo Ran, voice hoarse, give it me. Mo Ran, Shizun. Trade tokens with me. Chu Wanning said harshly. By now Mo Ran has also figured out what blood hourglass meant. The curse left by Gushan was no different from how he tormented Chu Wanning in the previous life. Indeed, whether god, demon, human or ghost, they all came up with more or less the same thing when trying to be as cruel as possible. Blood hourglass, pout the blood of the person into the hourglass instead of sand or water to keep time. The time interval ends when the person is bled dry. At his coronation ceremony, Taxian Jun used Chu Wanning as a blood hourglass. He made him watch while he tread on the remaining sex as he ascended the throne, had him bled drop by drop in front of him. However, in this life, in front of Gushan's blood hourglass, Chu Wanning was willingly trading his safe token with his own, willing to go on the cross in his place. Mo Ran's heart wanted to beat out of his chest. He couldn't even think. How could this be? How could this be? The copper hourglass missed its first strike and failed to grab a person. It brandished its thorny vines, ramping up for a second attack. Chu Wanning stared at him, eyes flickering with a light that trembled slightly. His face was paled from the pain as he panted slowly. Mo Ran, listen to me, hurry and trade with me. Mo Ran. Hurry, Chu Wanning's face was as pale as snow. Are you waiting for me to block the second attack for you? Mo ran, Shizun. The vines shot out again. In that instant, Mo Ran finally raised his token and Chu Wanning reached for it without thinking. But unexpectedly, right as their hands were about to touch, Mo Ran's eyes flashed as he pulled his hand back and instead turned to shield the unguarded Chu Wanning behind himself. The second wave of vines had reached them by then and Mo Ran met them head on. His whole body was wrapped up and swallowed by the vines in an instant as he was dragged to the copper hourglass. Mo Ran. Chu Wanning's eyes widened abruptly. Mo Ran's voice was quiet but he clearly heard him say, Shizun, I'm really not irredeemable. So, please do not give up on me. But he couldn't finish the rest of the sentence. He wanted to say this in his past life. In this life, he was also too late. Whether Chu Wanning gave up on him or not wasn't really important to him anymore. He just didn't want to owe this person. He was really too dumb as he couldn't figure out just what it was he felt toward Chu Wanning. He didn't want things to get even more complicated. Mo Ran thought to himself, in this life, the one who cared about and the one he liked was Shi Mei and no other. He didn't want to exchange tokens with Chu Wanning only because he didn't want to owe him any favor. He didn't want to see Chu Wanning bleed out again. His heart wasn't made of stone. Nothing made him happier than to have someone being nice to him. A little kindness is enough to make him smile brilliantly. But if it's a lot of kindness, then he would willingly die without complaint. Suddenly, out of the dense vines came a glistening sword. The sword was a holy weapon without doubt. It was ancient but carried an overwhelming aura of valor. A pair of rings flanked the hilt and the pommel was etched with thorned patterns. The sword was slender, with an intricate effigy of a bull-headed dragon embedded therein. The blade was coursing with an azure radiance that could slice clean through everything from the softest hair to the toughest metal. Mo Ran only had enough time to see the character Goshen on the sword before the sword of the god of weaponry stabbed directly into his chest. Blood gushed out into the hourglass. At the same time, a curtain of water suddenly poured down in the arsenal, separating Mo Ran and the others on two sides. The abrupt torrential deluge trapping everyone else on separate sides. Shi Mei yelled, Aran! Aran! The rapid downpour blocked their line of sight so they couldn't see how Mo Ran was holding up on the other side. Chu Wanning tried over and over to break through the water but was pushed out again and again, until it was drenched all the way through, eyes dark on his anxious face, lips total white. Chu Wanning's voice was hoarse as he called out, Mo Ran. His voice wasn't very low but it shook terribly. He himself didn't notice but it started Shi Mei as he turned to look at his way to see his usually calm and composed Shizun soaked and disheveled, his long eyelashes trembling as he failed to suppress his emotions and worry from his features. He summoned Tianwen, brow-knitted and body taut like a bowstring about to let loose. Shi Mei held onto him with unease, Shizun, stop it. There's no way to get through. Chu Wanning shook him off, eyes sharp as blades and silently raised a barrier to try again. But the waterfall was infused with ample spiritual energies of the Jinjinj lake. Not only was he not able to break through, the water beat him down like 1,000 arrows, cutting and piercing. Already weakened from his grave injuries early, this intense impact made it hard for him to remain standing. He clutched his chest and tried to endure but was still forced down to one knee. His face turned paler as the wounds on his back tore open and started to seep blood again. There was no way to tell if the wetness on Shi Mei's face was water or tears as he exclaimed in distress, Shizun. All this, for what? What do you mean for what? If it was you or Xuemeng back there, Chu Wanning spat, I would also, however, it hurt too much that he couldn't even finish the sentence. A sword suddenly flashed from behind the waterfall, effortlessly parting the torrential downpour in half. The energy of that sword was extraordinary and immense. It slashed right exactly where Shimei stood and was just about to hit him when Chu Wanning heaved his sleeve and used the entire remainder of his spiritual energy to erect a protective barrier around Shimei. He coughed up a mouthful of blood from overexertion. A deep and clear male voice rang out, reverberating inside the holy weapon arsenal, "I am the god of weaponry, Goshen Shanggong. How dare ye felons trespass on the forbidden territory of the holy weapons." End chapter. Dumb Husky and his white cat Shizun. Chapter 45. This venerable one knew you would come. Xuemeng shouted angrily into the air, "Shitty god, are you blind? How are we trespassing?" Shimei said, "It's no use, it's just a voice he left behind, he's not actually here at all. I think the fake Goshen has confused Zhengxin judgment and made him think we are trespassers with bad intentions." The voice continued. "Those who are worthy of a holy weapon in this world must understand what it means to be benevolent and must have resolve, ought not to be susceptible to the allure of fantastical illusions and capable of staying true to thy heart. Since thou hast come, thou must undertake my trial. If thou dost pass, I shall offer free passage and a holy weapon. But if thou is selfish and faint of heart, then thou art unfit to be the master of a holy weapon." Chu Wannings uttered between blood-stained lips, "Benevolent, is it benevolent to use someone in a blood hourglass?" He knew that Goshen Shanggong couldn't hear him, but he couldn't help but be angry, even though he was breathing heavily with every word, causing more pain in his wounds, and he couldn't keep his mean mouth shut. The voice continues to echo through the holy weapon arsenal, "As a test to thy temperament, all of ye shall be imminently plunged in Zhengxin dream illusion. If thou doth fail to wake from the illusion in time, their companion shall bleed out and perish." Upon hearing this, the color drained from the faces of all three. Shimei muttered, "What? It means that the three of them are about to fall into a hallucinatory dream. If they don't come to their senses in time, will the three of them spend eternity in a dream, leaving Mo Ran to bleed to death in reality?" Xuemeng was dumbfounded for a moment before shouting angrily, "What kind of immortal are you? If cultivating into immortality means ending up like you, I won't even bother to touch a sword again in my life." Chu Wanning also raged, "It's ridiculous." "Shizun," Shimei said, urging him on, "don't be angry, be careful of your wounds." And Goshen Shanggong, the bastard, even recited a poem at that moment, saying slowly, "Water poured upon even ground doth stream each its own way. Life is predestined, even if thou doth sigh as thou walketh and broods as thou lieth. Fill thy cup as comfort," song interrupted by toast, "yet the road remain ever arduous. The heart is not of wood or stone, how could it be unfeeling, words unspoken, and steps untread, nothing left to say?" Xuemeng was so angry that he was about to faint. "What are you mumbling about?" Shimei says, "It's from Bao Zhao's poem Difficult Paths, which means that each person has his or her own destiny, so how can one feel sorry for oneself and use wine to relieve oneself?" The toast interrupting the song. "Since people's hearts are not made of stone, it's impossible to have no feelings, but many things go unsaid." Goshen Shanggong let out a long sigh and said, "In this vast world, how many people wouldst be willing to abandon a perfect dream just to save another? The world is filled with such incessant war and slaughter. If a holy weapon were to fall into unscrupulous hands, the fault would be mine. How could I, the very creator of such weapons, forgiveth myself for the sins of such?" Suddenly, the holy weapon arsenal went dark. The pieces of the casting that were flying through the air stopped moving. A shimmering light slowly came on in the dome, as if starbursts of color were gradually trickling down to the ground. A voice in the air murmurs, "Sleep." The soft, crystalline light seemed to have some kind of mind-bending effect, and Shimei and Xuemeng, who were not well trained, soon fell into unconsciousness. "Sleep." Chu Wanning gritted his teeth and fought back, but the power of the founding god was so strong that he could not escape the drowsiness that came over him, and he fell into a dream. Inside the holy weapon arsenal. As the blood hourglass sacrifice, Moran is the only one awake, coughing up blood, and through the veil of the waterfall, he can dimly see the three men trapped in a hallucinatory dream. Chu Wanning, Shi Mei, and Xue Meng have all fallen asleep. Moran heard Gushan Shanggong's words and knew that only if one of them woke up in time could the spell be broken and he could be saved. But little by little, time passes, his mind grows dizzy and his body grows cold. But no one woke up from the dream. In his previous life, he had done this to Chu Wanning, and in this life, he felt what it was like to have his blood drained away. What a laugh! Who among them could give up the best dream of their lives where they are having what they wanted the most, to come and save him? Xue Meng definitely would not. Chu Wanning, never mind, not going to think about him. If there's anyone, it would probably be Shi Mei. He thought vaguely. But too much blood had been lost, and his hold on consciousness is slipping away. Moran glanced down at his feet, where the blood that had leaked to the bottom of the copper hourglass was mixed with the water in the funnel, glowing in pale red waves. Suddenly he wondered what he would have seen if he had fallen into Gushan's illusionary dream. Would he dream of delicate, translucent wantons and Shi Mei's gentle smile, Chu Wanning's praise and approval, and the sight when he first arrived at Shizun Peak, of Haitang flowers drifting across the sky, carried by the breeze? Moran. Suddenly, he heard someone calling him. Moran still hung his head, thinking that he should be so close to losing his mind that he was already hallucinating. Moran. Moran. Not an illusion. He snapped his face up. The scene in front of him caused his pupils to close suddenly. He nearly hissed, Shi Mei. Yes, it's Shi Mei. The one who woke up from the dream, who abandoned and gave up his perfect dream and still remembered him. It's Shi Mei. Moran looked across the waterfall at the frail young man walking towards him and suddenly a lump caught in his throat. Shi Mei. You. He wasn't sure what to say. Moran closed his eyes and said hoarsely. Thank you, for remembering me even while you're in a blissful dream. Shi Mei waded through the water, his clothes soaked to the skin, his brow darkened, his features as gentle as when Moran first saw him, as gentle as the ones he had seen in his dreams many times in his previous life, as gentle as the ones he remembers when his whole body felt cold and had no one else to reach for. Shi Mei said, Don't be silly. What are you thanking me for? As he approached, Moran realized that both his feet were bleeding. He didn't know when the ground became scalding hot. Gushan Shanggong seemed determined to test how far a person would go for their companion, so the lure of the dream was followed by ruthless torment. Shi Mei's boots had been burned through, and if he did not walk, the ground would remain as it always did, but if he insisted on moving forward, then every step would be accompanied by a surge of flames underfoot, not hot enough to burn a man outright into immobility, but painful enough to be absolutely excruciating. But this gentle man, who was clearly in so much pain himself already, took one step towards him with an ever more determined gaze in the midst of a glance. Moran, just bear with it a little longer. He said. I'll get you down in a minute. Their eyes met and Moran knew there was no point in saying, Don't come. The man's gaze was too determined and persistent. He had never seen such a look on Shi Mei's face before. If Moran had been in a more settled mood, he would have thought something was not right. Shi Mei always called him Aran, when did he ever call him Moran? He was so fixated on Shi Mei's kindness to him that he altogether failed to realize that the person in front of him was actually not Shi Mei but it's Chu Wanning. The ancient Willow's last technique is called heart pluck. This so-called heart pluck was an exchange of hearts and minds between people. When Chu Wanning broke free from his dream and awakens, he finds that him and Shi Mei have switched consciousness with each other. Under Zhaixinliu's spell, his consciousness had been transferred into Shi Mei's body, and vice versa. But Shi Mei did not wake up, so he was unaware that they had switched bodies. Chu Wanning had no time to explain and Moran, who is oblivious to the truth, really believes that the person in front of him is Shi Mei. He felt that Shimei would have been able to endure the pain, just as he could not forget his goodness even after his own death. People are stubborn creatures. But it's too cruel. When Chu Wanning finally reached the copper hourglass and climbed up the towering vines to rescue Mo Ran, thin burning thorns suddenly sprouted from the vine. Chu Wanning was not expecting this, and his hands was suddenly stung and burned by the hot spikes. He tried to grab on and continue climbing, but Shimei's body and cultivation was both weak and the thorns sliced through the skin and flesh of his hands as he plummeted down the vine. Chu Wanning cursed and grimaced in pain. This useless body of Shimingjing's. Mo Ran, Shimei. Chu Wanning fell to his knees, his flesh instantly scorched by the heat as he touched the ground, but his brow furrowed and he bit down on his lip out of habit and refused to cry out. Such an expression would have looked stubborn and cruel on his own face, but on Shimei's soft face, it was flattering and pitiful. He really can't compare, after all. Shimei. Mo Ran opened his mouth to speak, but tears flowed down his face instead. His heart felt like it's being cut by a knife. In his dense and blurred vision, he saw the thin and fragile body of the man, so frail, but little by little, clutching the vine willow and slowly climbing upwards. Fine thorns pierced his hands, and the flames burned his flesh. Bright red stained the area, and everywhere he passed, it was flecked with blood. Mo Ran closed his eyes, blood bubbling up his throat and his voice choked with each word. May. The man was close enough that Mo Ran saw a flash of pain in his eyes. He seemed to be in a lot of pain, and even Mo Ran's voice seemed to be a torture to him. So, the man in front of him, stubborn as he was, had a gaze that could almost be called pleading. Don't call again. Mo Ran, just wait a minute, I'll get you down. Almost as soon as the words were spoken, a tough light rose up under his eyes, like a sheathed blade, and on that sweet face, which was used to being gentle, it was indescribably beautiful. Chu Wanning's robe rolls and surges, his hair and feet leap onto the copper hourglass. His face was wan and he stood unsteadily, almost on the verge of collapse. If not for the rise and fall of his chest, he would seem no different from the dead. In that moment, Mo Ran felt he would have been better off bleeding dry and dying than put him through such suffering. His throat was all fractured. I'm sorry. Chu Wanning knew that the apology was not for himself. He wanted to explain, but caught a glimpse of the silver-blue sword of Gushan Shanggong, stabbed right between Mo Ran's chest and ribs. The sword is likely the source of the spiritual energy of the vines. He worried that Mo Ran might injure himself further from the shock should he explain, so he just continued pretending to be his Shimei, asking Mo Ran, "Do you trust me?" "I trust you." There was no hesitation. Chu Wanning gave him a glance from beneath his lashes, gripping the hilt of the sword, which was close to the main artery. The slightest slip could cost Mo Ran's life. Chu Wanning's hand that were wrapped around the sword shook a little, holding but not moving. Mo Ran's eyes were still red, but he suddenly smiled. "Shimei." Mo Ran said, "I'm not going to die." "No. If I'm going to die, can I hold you for a while?" He said this with care, his eyes shining with a wet light. Chu Wanning's heart softened instantly. Yet this softness immediately freezes into ice at the thought of Mo Ran seeing another person in his eyes. He suddenly felt as if he was an insignificant clown on the stage, hidden behind the water-sleeved clouds of the green-clad flower girl where no one noticed him. He is redundant in this touching and heartfelt repertoire. Or perhaps his only use was to wear the ugly face of the clown and with an exaggerated smile painted on, act as a foil to the joys and sorrows, the love and hate of other people. How ridiculous! Unaware of this, Mo Ran saw the twinkle in Chu Wanning's eyes and thought it was Shimei's reluctance, saying immediately, "Just a hug. Just a little bit." A faint, imperceptible sigh. "Actually, Mo Ran, what?" "Never mind." Chu Wanning said, "It's nothing." He leaned over, not particularly close for fear of moving the sword. then he reached out and gently closed his hand around Mo Ran's shoulder. He heard Mo Ran whisper in his ear, "Shimei, thank you for waking up, thank you for still remembering me even while having a blissful dream." Chu Wanning lowered his eyes, his eyelashes fluttering like butterflies, and then he smiled lightly, "Don't mention it." After a pause, he added, "Mo Ran." Chu Wanning, as if still in a dream, embraced him, stroked his hair and sighed softly, "Do you know that if a dream is too good to be true, it often isn't?" He said this and the hug was as quick as a dragonfly. Mo Ran raised his eyes, not really understanding Shimei's meaning, but knowing that this little hug was a kind gesture from Shimei, a piece of sweetness given out of pity. Sweet and sour, with a hint of astringency as it rubs against the base of the tongue. The moment the sword was struck, blood flew like so many hatang flowers whipped off by a fierce wind. Mo Ran felt a sharp pain in his heart and thought for a moment that he was going to die, and with a mixture of resignation, he suddenly blurted out, "Shimei, I have always liked you." "What about you?" As the sword fell to the ground, the vine and willow scattered in an instant, the rushing waterfall abruptly ceased and the holy weapon arsenal was suddenly silent again. "I have always been particularly fond of you." "What about you?" With his body at its limit, Mo Ran felt a violent blackness swept across his eyes. The moment he fell, he was caught by a pair of blood-stained hands and fell into Shimei's arms. He don't know if it was an illusion or not, but Mo Ran saw Shimei's eyes slowly closing with a thin frown, and water seemingly cascading from his eyes. It was as if he heard Shimei whisper, "Me too." Mo Ran. I think it was a hallucination, because why else would Shimei would like so sad when he said, "I also, like you." Unable to hold on any longer, Mo Ran sunk into unconsciousness. End chapter.